Welcome to our next session on the positivity bias. We're working with the book from Mendel, Kalmenson, and we are looking now at chapter 7. And I love this chapter because this is it's one thing when we talk about, in the moment when the Rebbe, is always looking to find something good about people and their situations and trying to find the good. But here, the Rebbe is actually going back into Torah itself and taking characters from Torah who have been villainized and probably for righteous reasons, right? But the Rebbe says, well, let's look a little deeper.
Yeah.
I love this. So it begins with the first one of Elisha ben Avuya. And he had been a great Talmudic scholar who had gone on to become a heretic to the degree that he was called Acher, the other, and it's actually the archetype of other that's used throughout rabbinical thought. This is the example of the worst type of apostate, right? And
is that really? But he's still teaching Torah, though.
Well, the Torah that he had taught before was recorded like some of the other Torah thoughts, right? But the beautiful, interesting piece about this one that he talks about here is that on one Shabbos, Rabbi Meir, who's also one of the sages of that era, he was walking behind Elisha to learn Torah from him. They were talking, they were learning and talking, but Elisha is riding a horse, which is a public desecration of Shabbos, right?
That's right. It's like me driving the shul. I do it though.
I think there's a difference. You're driving the shul, right?
Right. He's just riding the horse on Shabbat.
He is specifically out there making a public desecration for the purpose of making a public desecration.
Oh, I didn't realize he was doing that on purpose.
Yes. And Rabbi Meir, in the meantime, is walking along with him and having a Torah discussion. And it's a fascinating part because at some point, Elisha ben Avuya stops and says, hey, we've reached the Shabbos tchum, the Shabbos limits, and you really are not allowed to go past here. It's like, here's this guy who's totally apostate, riding a horse on Shabbos in public, but he's telling Rabbi Meir, you need to stop here. So it's an amazing story, but the Rebbe brings out how, even the fact that he's an apostate and everything else, and he's reached the title where he's actually, referred to as Acher, that it's that bad. And yet he has certain personality values that are steeped in Torah that just because I'm not keeping Shabbos, I can't let him. He does keep Shabbos. And he has a responsibility to another Jew.
That was
good. Is the riding of the horse? There was something in the Daf Yomi about this the other day, just in passing.
Mm-hmm.
And there was a comment that it's not a malacha on Shabbos, that it's an Isser D'Rabbanan. That's so.
It's the D'Rabbanan, and it also depends on the purpose of the riding and stuff like that. But,
right.
But here, obviously, he's doing this as a public desecration, and part of that desecration is a slam to the rabbis. It's like you said, this one, the Rabbanan, that's his intention, is to slam the rabbis, right? And then, and I love this story, the Rebbe keeps using Torah to defend, right? So it's not like he's making a new statement. He keeps using Torah as a means to defend the people who are doing things which we think is absolutely terrible.
Yeah, I know. But he goes to do a number of Torah lessons after this.
Exactly. So here the one is he actually brings from the Mishnah a story about Elisha ben Avuya and a story about his student Rabbi Meir, and they're not too far apart in the Mishnah. And he reflects on both of them, because one of the things that Rebbe talks about is in many Farbringens, the Rebbe talks about so-and-so makes this psak halacha, makes this law decision.
What is a Farbringen, by the way?
A Farbringen is a gathering,
A what?
a gathering.
A gathering?
Yeah, so people would gather together and to hear the Rebbe speak. And so Farbringen can be an informal thing, or it can be a more formal thing.
Because
You know, sometimes
in this passage, yeah.
sometimes at the end of our recordings, after I turn off the recordings, we end up having a Farbringen.
I got you. To be an informal gathering. Okay.
Right. But the intention of a Farbringen, what, you know, informal or formalized or, you know, whatever, is really to you know, Jews gather together to talk about Torah and bolster our own personal observances.
Oh, okay. Okay. Now that makes more sense.
Yeah. And so one of there was, for many years, the Rebbe would have a Farbringen on special occasions. But I remember when I was in yeshiva in 1981, 82, the Rebbe was having a Farbringen almost every Shabbos.
Yeah, this is it mentions a particular Shabbat on for this.
Yeah. And Shabbos Farbringens by the Rebbe is a unique event because it's funny because sometimes you hear people talking about, you know, Shabbos afternoon, what do you do? And men should come home and come home reasonable time to make kiddush for the family and things like that. And when the Rebbe had a Farbringen, many of us never left the shul. You know, you went through the davening, and you could run home and make kiddush and come back. The Rebbe left the room and then made kiddush and then came back. But many of us never left because you want to make sure you got a good spot to sit or to stand.
Oh,
and so,
yeah,
you know, and they moved the table, the benches and around inside the shul. So 770, unlike, you know, synagogues where you have the, you know, the movie seats, you know, attached to the
Fixed.
to the floor, fixed to the floor, things like that. These were wooden benches where the seat would fold up, and they were typically 8 to 12 feet long, and you could reconfigure the entire synagogue in less than half an hour. So during services, all the benches are facing forward throughout the entire length of the synagogue. All right, but there's a small, and there's bleachers in the back, and there's a small platform. There's a platform that runs the length of the southern wall. And so after services are over, the benches all get flipped around, so they're focused on that long bench where the Rebbe will come and sit. And so people vie for their positions and their seats right after services are over and wait the hour till the Rebbe comes back down. And when the Rebbe comes back down, they're already in place. And you know, and the Farbringen would go on all afternoon until Shabbos was over. We, you know, stop for mincha and then after continue the Farbringen and then go on to Marav afterwards. And the Rebbe would make Havdalah and people would get wine from the Rebbe's.
okay, I just wasn't familiar with it. That's all.
Yeah, no, but it's I'm remembering these amazing occasions.
Also, it's a good memory. Okay,
where you never left the shul. You came Shabbos morning and you went home Saturday night after Shabbos.
I know you want to get into that analogy though about the Torah as a child being.
Yes. So the Rebbe in many Farbringens would talk about know the person, and the Talmud is quoting the person about something. Why is he quoting that person? What is it about that person that statement is so relevant? And so here he says, it's interesting to note that there's a teaching from Avuya, Elisha ben Avuya, who says, he who studies Torah as a child, to what can that be compared? To ink written on a fresh parchment. And he who studies from Torah from an old man, to what he can be compared? To ink written on paper that's been erased. So the idea is that if you're someone who's young, it really, the lesson sinks in. It's solid. You get older, the learning's not so easy because it's being built on all the other stuff that we have gathered over the years, some of which is not necessarily wholesome stuff.
Yes.
So
I pictured the lettering in my mind.
the Rebbe suggests that despite the outward appearance of Elisha ben Avuya and his public disgrace of Torah and mitzvahs, nevertheless, he learned Torah when he was young. And the Torah he learned when he was young is still solid there. That was, so you look at his own quote and you can use it back to him. And that's why Rabbi Meir could follow after him and learn from him, because there's a quote from Rabbi Meir that says, look not at the vessel, but what it contains.
Yeah, that was a good quote. Yes, it was.
So you look at Avuya and you don't judge him for who he is now, but you have an opportunity to learn from what he learned when he was young. So that's Rabbi Meir's opinion, is you should learn from whoever you can. And Elisha ben Avuya was one who learned the fresh ink on fresh parchment.
And then we go into the soul.
Yes. Yeah.
Now, was he do you think he was intentional with what he was doing, or he forgot his teachings?
Elisha ben Avuya? Oh, he was intentional. He was intentional.
So he tried to support his positions.
I don't think he went publicly to support his positions as much as publicly to disavow.
There are a number of situations in the Talmud where students have to remind their teachers of their prior teachings.
Yes.
that they have forgotten.
Or
they'll try to defend their new position, and they'll say, "But teacher, you said this in the past."
Yes, absolutely. And so I think in this circumstance, if I remember correctly, where there was he went to his Elisha ben Avuya went to his teacher and said, "It's this one thing you said that set me off completely." So it's a whole study of its own, but it's that type of thing. So interestingly enough, the Rebbe now gives another example, and he talks about most of us, we judge others on their actions because that's what we can see. But we have our own ideas of, we judge ourselves by our intentions because we see those.
Well, we know what our intentions are, right?
Yes. And we tend to judge ourselves favorably. If they only knew the troubles I have,
Right, we justify it, yes.
We justify it, yes. So the idea of the Rebbe was committed to actively seeking and finding that inner point of holiness within each person. And so this generosity of spirit that Rebbe would apply across the board, anywhere, including, as we said at the beginning here, even into characters that we talk about from the Talmud and from Chumash and things like that. And it's fascinating to see this one. Okay, so going back in time and redeeming somebody.
He picks some interesting stories.
Absolutely. And shares with us, look deeper. Teach yourself to look deeper, because there's extenuating circumstances for everybody, things like that. I think this beautiful first example he gives is the first example of sin. He shares this story of Adam Harishon, the first man, and he's the sixth day of creation he's made, and he's given one commandment, and within an hour he's blown it. and that's how we typically see it. That's the
Where did they get that hour from? Seeing that in Torah.
So you break it, it's in the Talmud. You break down the events of the day and the time of Shabbos, and it breaks down to about an hour.
I didn't know that, but yeah, because I
Yeah.
read the Torah portion.
Yeah, no, it's not in the written Torah, but the Talmud breaks it down. Talmud breaks it down into step by step what happened. And you think to yourself, I mean, come on, 1 hour? You couldn't,
Yeah, well, he makes it look good.
right?
Yeah.
That's what the Rebbe
The-
says.
As bad as that was, he never owned up to it. He blamed it on his wife and the snake, and he never took responsibility for it.
Yeah, so it's funny because we talk about that all the time. It's like, God turns to Adam and Adam says, two things. He says, the woman that you gave me, right? So he blames her and he blames God. I love that move, right?
Well, you have to admit, God put a snake in the Garden of Eden.
Yeah, a nachash, and it's not this. It's a fascinating creature when you look back into Talmud. This was a creature that had arms and legs and spoke.
Oh, sounds like a politician.
And its punishment for its crime was that it would crawl on its belly and eat the dust of the earth. But
Sounds
it's
like a soldier.
Pardon?
Sounds like a soldier.
Yes. But it's funny because, again, the Rebbe looks at the redemptive side of things. And the Rebbe says, there's this huge situation that is the whole purpose of creation is to reveal godliness down in the world and to see if mankind could choose to acknowledge and serve God out of choice, not out of being overwhelmed by the spiritual. He's got to have choice. He's got to have, at least by appearance, an equality between good and evil. It's got to at least appear that way because he can actually have a choice then. And we're going to see if he'll choose to do good. And so the nachash, the snake, the nachash is its only purpose in existence is to test him. That's a lot of weight on the nachash. Your whole purpose of existence is if you can do. So when Adam lasts for an hour, the Rebbe says, like, wow, like he lasted an hour under all of that pressure. He lasted an hour. That's a phenomenal thing. And so again, the Rebbe is turning the story and saying, talk about mitigating circumstances.
He held out. Okay, well, you can look at that the cup is half full. That's what he's doing. The cup is half full.
Yeah. And he's basically saying, under the circumstances, that's amazing. That's absolutely astonishing that he was absolutely able to hold out for an hour is a phenomenal thing. Now, he doesn't mention it here, but the Hasidus goes and the Zohar actually goes to talk about Chava, Eve, right? What happened there? And we bring out the idea from a same thing. Hasidus brings out from Chava. It's not that it was a simple thing that the Nachash tricked her. She saw a deeper purpose here. She was able to perceive something Adam was missing, which was that if you don't eat from the forbidden fruit, then we're done. The Garden of Eden stays, and the revelation of godliness stays as it is, and what's been accomplished? She saw that there's a deeper purpose here, that the deeper purpose is, yeah, go ahead and do that first sin, create a world where good and evil are apparently equal. And then every time any human being chooses good over evil, we have shed light on the world. We have revealed God's holiness and sanctity in the universe. And that's the actual purpose of the universe. So if you don't eat from the forbidden fruit, then we really haven't accomplished anything. And so it's credited to Eve that she made this decision of do the negative because a greater good will come out of it. I'm thinking of
that must be in the Talmud also, because I don't remember that as part of the story.
yeah, it's a phenomenal piece of this. And I think, what comes to mind just in the moment right now, there's a and I don't remember the names and the details of the story, but there is a merit of honor award winner who's basically, he won his medal of valor, or I don't remember the names of the valor, but he earned his medal by directly disobeying orders from command. Basically, he had gotten out of a firefight, but his entire group was still back in the midst of it, and it was getting much worse, and there was no way they were going to get out of it. And he asked permission to go back in with a tank, and he was told multiple times, absolutely not. We're not going to lose another. You cannot go back in. You're safe. You cannot go back in. And he said, thank you for your orders. And he went right in. And literally he went in like a bat out of hell, blasting and insanity, and literally got everybody else out. He saved his whole team.
Audie Murphy, maybe?
Could be. I don't remember the names, but the point was being told exactly, do not do this by no unequivocal means. Do not do this. Yeah, thank you. And hell bent on leather, he goes back in for it, right?
Because he knows the thing to do.
You look at Chava, and she sized up the situation and realized the greater good is if we go against the rule right now and create a new environment. And that's where greatest good can come. And she had the faith in mankind, in humanity, that we could do this. She had faith in her children. We could do this. So again, if you look
how that turned out for one of them.
We're still working on it, right? But we're going to prove her right.
One of her children.
Wes, yes. But again, that's the thing, is we could go back through all of these situations, as the Rebbe has demonstrated. We could go back to every one of these circumstances and limud zchus. We could find that if you look at it from a different perspective, there's something amazing and good about each situation. I think
that's every one of them in this chapter was looking at things in a different perspective.
And in our Parsha class, we've also talked about this next one. We talked about Yaakov and Esav, and how there was this diametrically opposed the two forces, right? And Rivka, the mother, loves Yaakov, but Yitzchak, the father, he loves Esav. And you have to ask that question of what is that about? How is it that the father loves Esav? He's not blind to the reality of what's going on with this guy. And we go in and we learn out from here. Esav is the hunter of the field. Esav is the one who is involved in the world. And Yaakov is called Yoshev Ahalim. He's the one who sits in tents. He's the one who is in a sense the ascetic. He's the one who's separate from the world. He's a shepherd taking care of sheep. He's not involved in the politics and the machinations and the business world and things like that. And Yitzchak is thinking that the job of revealing godliness in the world means you have to get involved with the world. You've got to get involved. And so Esav's the one who can do it. Yaakov, it's great. Yaakov preserving and sanctifying and all that stuff is great. But at the end of the day, that's not the mission. And even Yaakov, after he runs away and he gets married and he has all his children and he's coming back, he acknowledges his father's point is that he can't do this on his own. He needs to embrace Esav's lifestyle and things. Something about Esav's power and energy to deal with the world, he has to incorporate that. So he tries very hard to get Esav on board to do this with him. At least they make some level of a peace treaty here by all the gifts that he sends and all the kind words he sends. But at the end of the day, Esav's not doing this. And so Yaakov realizes that it's on him to somehow incorporate the ideas of Esav, of getting invested in the world, and somehow use that to take the family mission to the next stage. And so when he has 12 sons, the same battle continues. How is the battle? Joseph sees that we have to get involved in the world. And Yehuda is the one who says, no, we're not going that route. And the more Yosef pushes, the more Yehuda pushes back until the point where they sell off Yosef.
First I throw him in the pit. Yeah, but yeah.
So they see him as a threat to the Jewish people. They see Joseph as another Esav. You know, Isaac had 2 sons. Abraham had 2 sons. One walked away with everything. Isaac has 2 sons. One walks away with everything. Along comes 12 sons, and it looks like Joseph is trying to take the whole booty. That's how they perceive this. And Judah is saying, no, we have to stay insular. We have to stay focused. Do not get involved in all the things of the world. And when you come down to those two, they're both right. How do you incorporate both? And it's down in Egypt when they finally get everybody together and Joseph reveals himself as the viceroy that they start working this out together.
Well, as Joseph puts it when he's in Egypt as the viceroy, this was God's doing.
Yeah.
So it was
both
meant
of
that
those
people were into slavery.
Both of those are true. They're both good paths, but at the end of the day, you have to have both. And so even when we look at Esav with this horrible taste in our mouths of, here's the guy he's a murderer and villainous and everything else, but Isaac sees he's the one who has the power to get invested in the world and change the world and elevate the world.
Not a murderer, is a hunter. He kills animals. But
yeah, look into the Talmud, look into the Medrash. He's a murderer.
There's more to it, huh?
Oh yeah. Remember the story of the lentil soup?
Yeah.
Yeah. So why was Jacob making lentil soup?
I don't remember. I just know that his brother was hungry.
Yeah. So he was making lentil soup because Abraham had died that day. Isaac is sitting Shiva, and Jacob makes a lentil soup for his father who's sitting Shiva. Why? The Talmud asks, why did Abraham pass away that day? God wanted him not to see what Esav was up to. The boys were 13 years old. Esav left the tent of learning, and he went out and committed his first murder. And God did not want Abraham to have to suffer through that, so he took him away that same day. He wouldn't even know about it.
That I don't remember. See, this is what happens when you don't read the Talmud thoroughly.
So there's more to the story. There's always more to the story, right? It's interesting. One of and the Rebbe spoke about this story numerous times in a completely different. So the 10 spies who go out to venture into the land and figure out how we should conquer. Their mission, assigned mission, is figure out how we should conquer. And they come back.
And we should not conquer.
They come back and they say, we are unable to go up against the people, for they are stronger than us. And including God in that. And so typically, we talk about the Meraglim, the spies, in a very derogatory terms, because not only did they not complete their mission, but they messed it up for everybody else. And God essentially says, you want something to cry about? I'll give you something to cry about. You don't want to go? Fine. You're all going to die in the desert. You got 40 years now. And all of you who are adults now, you're not going in. Right? So this is a horrible, horrible thing, right? This decree. So these guys are just blasphemed throughout the Talmud, right? And the Rebbe asks, what happened here? This can't make sense on the surface story, because these were leaders of the Jewish people. These were heads of state. These were like leaders of each tribe.
Princes of the tribes.
Yeah, and the Siyam. These were the princes of the tribes. These are not no goodniks. These are amazing, amazing people. And so you got to stop. So the Rebbe goes back into the words of Chumash and reanalyzes all of the words of the Chumash here, and he tells the story a bit differently. He tells the story as when they go into the land, right? So they describe, we are as insects in their eyes. Grasshoppers. And the Rebbe points out, who said that? That's the Meraglim, the spies. They're projecting upon the enemy what they must be like. They've made themselves grasshoppers. It's their own self-esteem that they're talking about here. And what's happened is that, how could that happen? The Rebbe then asks, how could it possibly be? They've spent some time in the desert where everything is taken care of. God reveals, his glory is revealed, and they have man. They have the man that falls every day. They've got the well of Miriam. They've got the clouds of glory surrounding them. It's a miraculous existence. It's an absolute miraculous existence. And the next step is to go into the land and become farmers, and trust that if you plow and you seed, it will grow and it will harvest and you will have food, which seems to be that our sustenance is dependent on us. And you want to go from God providing man in the desert to us having to be responsible for this? That's unreal. Now, the purpose is, so we should understand that just like God took care of you in the desert, the fact that you seed and you plant, God's taking care of you either. Also, there's no difference. It's just the channel through which it happens, but God's still doing this. So don't get so uptight. We worry ourselves.
All of those miracles, though, still required human participation.
You had to gather them on. You had to do something with it.
You had to gather them on. Moses had to hit the rock. Somebody had to walk into the sea first before it parted.
Nasha ben Abinadav. Yep.
Right. So there was human participation. Hashem provided the miracles, but the human had to take a step.
And that was to give us the training wheels to the idea that when you'll go into the land, you can do this, right? But they were so overwhelmed with the prospect of having to make a dir b'tachtainim, that they would be responsible for making a dwelling for God in the world, in the physical world. They were totally overwhelmed with that. And if you stop to think about it, here's a generation that came out of Egypt that were slaves. They hadn't even, they had become, this whole generation grew up as slaves. They didn't know anything else. They didn't know how to take responsibility. They didn't know how to lead and guide and do all the things that living in a world, in a country all your own, that's going to take. And they're terrified of this. So in reality, it's the generation that grows up in the wilderness that's going to be the ones that actually go into Israel and actually make this happen. All the people who were in the desert, that were in Egypt as adults, they don't make it. They don't have that mentality to be able to make that transition. And so,
Just to include Moses.
yeah. But the Rebbe again is looking at the idea that they were on a holy mission. They were looking at a holy side of things. And then I love the end of this story where the Rebbe quotes a statement from our sages: due to the severity of their sin, they have no portion in the world to come. So that's a damning statement. They have no portion of the world to come. And the Rebbe then explains that if you flip the story, you see that the holiness of what they are, of what their point was, their passion for holiness and living a life completely imbued with holiness. The Rebbe explains the spies do not have merely a portion; they get more. He takes the words and says, the sages said they have no portion in the world to come. No, they have more than a portion in the world to come. And then when the Hasidim start singing a song that's translated to the negative about removing all the wicked people in the times of Mashiach, the Rebbe stops them from singing and says, we just talked about the positivity. Why are you talking about Rishoyim, wicked people? Sing a different song, a different niggin about V'yiftach v'yam of Tzadik. May the righteous one flourish in his days. He's saying, no, they were not wicked. They were righteous. They were righteous, and they had a perspective that was righteous, and there's just an error in decision-making, but they were coming from a very holy and great place. It's an amazing transition to see, being able to look at things positively. And he does this with Nadav and Avihu. Nadav and Avihu were Aaron's sons.
Sons of Aaron that get killed.
So they die. They're killed by their death was interesting. I've
always thought of it as punishment.
Yeah, that's how it's presented. That their punishment is that a godly fire came down from heaven, went in through their nostrils, and burned out their soul. But the Rebbe flips this over, and he says, we keep looking at all the negative things, but what's the source of those opinions? What's the source of their thought process that they would die? They had a passion that was an uncontrollable passion. They were so passionate about serving God that they had to go bli gvul, without limits. And they went to the point where, we talk about if you have a single flame on a candle, and then you bring a torch right next to it, right? What happens to the flame? It jumps off the wick and joins the greater flame, the greater entity. It's attracted to that. These souls, Nadav and Avihu, were so attracted to godliness that they were willing to completely expire, to give up life itself and any of the benefits of the physical world. They were so passionate about God and spirituality that they just left. And you see that what was their death? Nobody else gets this. This was a divine acknowledgement of their passion to be unified with godliness. And they literally expire. And how is that they expire? The fire goes in through their nostrils. Why their nostrils? Because that's how God breathed in the breath of life into the first man. He breathed into them a breath of life, and God took it back from them. And they were able to be completely unified with God. The problem is they put their passion about wanting to be close to God above God's mission. It's what they wanted to do, become close to God, as opposed to what God wants to do is stay down in the world and make a dir b'tachtonim. There's a statement in the Mishnah that says, against your will you were born, and against your will you will die. meaning the soul, before it comes into the world, it doesn't want to leave this heavenly relationship with God, basking in the glory of God. It doesn't want to leave that place, but there's a greater mission. There's a greater mission to be done. You got to go down the world. So against its will, it goes down to the world to fulfill this mission. Once the soul is down in the world, it gets so caught up into the challenges of the world and the pleasures of the world that now he doesn't want to die. And so against our will, we die. Nadav and Avihu, they had the first part. They had the part about, they came down into the world, but they wanted to go. They didn't have the second part. They wanted only the holy part. And so in Hasidus, we talk of a Ratzer V'Shuv. There has to be this thing of Nadav and Avihu, this attraction to a totally spiritual life, to be totally encompassed within the spiritual, to give up life itself for the spiritual. We have to have that to motivate us, to get us going, to have a spiritual life. But you can only go so far before you have to realize, but remember, that's not the mission. God's mission is to come down into this world, shuv, return down into the world and ground yourself and do the mitzvahs here. This ratzu v'shuv, this back and forth, is a constant part of a spiritual life. The attraction to the spiritual, but that's not the job. The job, there was a debate. I remember one of the rabbis, I think this was, I think I know who this is, but I won't quote his name because I'm not sure. But basically, he ended up, he thought he was going to be on a panel discussion, but it turned out it was kind of more like a debate. But each of these religious faith leaders, they talked about, the spiritual life and the asceticism and removing oneself from the physical and, going up into the mountains and becoming holy, or separating yourself from the world and not getting married, or all these different things they talked about. And then it was the rabbi's turn. And the rabbi's comment was, to separate yourself from world and worldly desires to achieve the spiritual, that's easy. Try getting married and having kids and having a job and staying spiritual. Now that's a task. And that's the Jewish job, right? No, you do have to come down here. You do have to get married. You do have to have kids. You do have to hold down a job. And in the midst of all that, you've got to be holy. And Nadav and Avihu, they wanted the spiritual part. And so Moses tells his brother that he had a prophecy that God would be sanctified by two amazing, special, holy people. And he says to Aaron, I thought that was going to be us, but I see it was your sons. They were more attracted to the spiritual even than we were. And they got it. They got what they wanted. They got to be completely united with God. But that's not the job. But the sanctification of God,
spiritual overdose is what the chapter calls it.
Yeah, a spiritual overdose. Yeah, and that's we call it an overdose because that's not the goal, but we got to have an aspect of that in our lives, because if you don't have that, you've got nothing.
Versus, by the way, being evil or just doing what they wanted to do. Versus, when I first heard this story, it's like, why wouldn't you listen to what God wanted? Why would you do things that you weren't supposed to? So,
well, it's one of those things as a parent, we sometimes have, where
children always push the corners of the envelope.
Yes. And sometimes the kids want to do something for dad. And so they decide what they're going to do. But maybe that's not what you want. So they're going to go off and do what they want to do for dad, but dad really doesn't want that. So what's better?
They've justified it in their minds.
Right. So what's better is it better to do, to do something for dad or to do what dad wants? Right.
So,
I-
so now we go into Korach.
Kairach. This was a funny piece because Kairach is absolutely painted as just what the, you know,
A rebel.
yes. He rebels against Moses and get others to do the same. I mean, how bad can it get? And he's semi-successful in his campaign. But the Rebbe says, but look at his campaign. His campaign is all about all of us are holy and all of us should have the right to be able to commune with God directly and to bring the incense. Wow, the incense is such an amazing, special, holy thing. It's such a spiritual offering. We all ought to be able to do that. And he's right. Strong timing. But again, the Rebbe says, you know, we've blasphemed him all this time, but look at where he was coming from. We need to have that in our lives. We need to bring part of Kairach into our lives, to be willing to really fight for the spiritual rights within boundaries. But the essence of his argument, absolutely. So again, he's, you know, the Rebbe has chosen the most villainized characters and brings out, you know, the good within in each of them.
Yeah, the next two are no better.
So I just remember this past week, I remember when teaching Parsha to my grandchildren and talking about, you know, and there's Dasan and Aviram, they're desecrating Shabbos right after we're told to do so. And there's Dasan and Aviram, and they're putting out, you know, they're putting out man Shabbos morning to be able to come out and say, oh, look, there's man Shabbos morning. You said there wouldn't be. And so I was really, they're troublemakers. And that's how I was talking about it with my grandchildren. Now, here's the troublemakers. And then I read this chapter and I was thinking, oh man, I did it. You know, I blasphemed them just like everybody else. And the Rebbe is saying, you know,
Vigilant guardians of the people. That's what the Rabbi says.
yeah, maybe a little overzealous, but who else had the chutzpah to you know, again, like Kairach, who had the chutzpah to come to Moshe and say, yo, you're making trouble for the Jewish people, like, you know. And so, yeah, to see Dan Lachaf's chus, to see the good in each and every one. And to me, the most amazing story of the whole chapter, to me, really is this one and the last one. But to me, this one is an amazing story. This story of Miriam Bas Bilga. Miriam Bas Bilga is really blasphemed and just.
By the way, I didn't even know this story. I had never read it anywhere.
So I hadn't either till the Rebbe brought it up. And I think that's the beautiful part, is that in the Gemara, they talk about all the negative things about this, you know, the whole family is in a sense gets a bad name in the Talmud because of her actions. And the Rebbe says, now hang on a second. You got a world going into assimilation. What do you want from a young lady? She marries a general who isn't awed by a guy in a uniform and a general. Right? So he's got all this. So how could you blame her? You know, the miracle is that others didn't follow her. She's the only one who went this way, but you can't blame her under the environment of all the things that are going on. The Romans are in power. They're
Greek.
The Greeks are in power, and all the things that they're doing, and she's drawn to their all of their music and to their. I mean, look at the world today. You know, what do teenagers look at? It's all the pop culture that's going on and all the things. So you can't blame a kid.
By the media, yes, they are.
Yeah, so you can't blame a kid for getting caught up in the pop culture. You don't blame her for what's happened, where she's gone. it's a miracle others didn't go, but you can't blame her. And yet, after all the things that's happened, that she's left the family, she's left the faith, she's married a Greek general, and yet when he goes into the temple, her emotions overwhelm her. The Talmud says she takes her sandal and bangs on the altar and says, "Wolf, wolf, you consume the people's wealth, but you don't answer them in their time of need." So she's insulting God, right? That's the initial take. But the Rebbe says, what is she doing? After all that's happened, she's emotionally caught up with the fact that God isn't taking care of her people. Look what's happening to her people. She's gone as far as you can away from her people, and yet she's not. She can't be. And in that moment of anguish, she's angry at God for not taking care of the Jewish people. And so here comes the Rebbe thousands of years later, and with tears in his eyes, he says, but look at the good. Look at where she's coming from. Then there's this unbreakable bond between her and her people that when she gets the Holy of Holies, she can't but say, God, how could you let this happen to your people? And the Rebbe is bringing out what the Alter Rebbe talked about. A Jew neither desires nor is even capable of being separated from godliness. Chas v'shalom. It's not a thing. It can't happen. As much as we may try, as far as she's gone, she can't separate from it. There's a modern day funny part about, to me, an interesting and funny piece about it, but there are a number of young teenagers that come from religious families, from Orthodox religious Hasidic families, who have left Orthodox Judaism. And again, how can you blame them with the pop culture the way it is and everything else in the media? You can't avoid this stuff, right? And as much as we try, you can't. And they leave religious life, they leave the family, and what do? They've got a WhatsApp group to talk to each other about this stuff. They still can't leave us. They still can't leave the fold. They're still together in their separateness.
Yeah, well, that's the ink on new parchment.
Yeah,
they may come back. The foundation is there.
Absolutely, and they certainly will in the time and place. And the Rebbe was given that example from 2,000 years ago, where he redeems a young lady who got caught up in pop culture, but at the end of the day, her emotions, she's not separate. She can't be separate.
Yeah, no, right. Yeah.
And then this last story here.
There's two stories. Well,
I
yeah.
was going to say, there's a story about the Baal Shem Tov here with the sukkah. And this is a funny story too, because I think I've seen the Rebbe do the same type of thing in different ways. But the story here was that the Baal Shem Tov, he builds a sukkah that's questionably kosher, very questionably kosher. And the rabbis come and they argue back and forth and they say it's not kosher, and he maintains that it is kosher. And you stop and think, what is he doing? He's validating the least possible kosher sukkah. He's validating. And he's doing it personally. He's doing it himself. It's an amazing thing. It's one thing, to give charity, to give of what you have towards others in the physical sense, but to give up your spiritual for others, to have a minimally kosher sukkah in order to validate someone else's sukkah, that's Ahavas Yisrael. That's love. That's love. And then again, the last story here. The last story again is coming back to Moses as the amazing example. here at the,
This
and-
was probably, I love the way the chapter closes on this. Yeah.
right. Says the breaking of the tablets in anger, right? Breaking the tablets in anger. And so there's so many times I hear people talk about, using examples from the Torah of our sages doing something wrong. And I've heard someone say, isn't it great that the Torah doesn't deify our sages? And I just got to say, yeah, and you missed that story completely.
Well, yeah, he's looking after the people.
Yeah.
So that if he brought the law down, they would have been violating the law. They would have been doomed.
And so the
Steph,
example,
part of this, I'm talking too much.
he's saving it. He's going to comment at the end. He's going to give a synopsis of the whole thing. I love the fact that, we think about Moses coming down and he sees the people sitting with the golden calf, and in anger, he shatters the tablets. And you think it's a destructive behavior in an angry mode. And we've all done that.
Before I read this part of it, I always looked at that as he got pissed off when he came down and he just smashed the tablets.
And he allowed his anger to overcome him. That's the typical reading, right?
Kind of like putting your fist through the door or something like that,
Oh yeah, no, I've had to patch a wall. And so here you see, if you look a little bit deeper, you stop to think, wait a second, what's really going on? God is marrying the Jewish people. The betrothal document is the 10 Commandments. And God says to Moses, go down and check on those folks now. There's a noise down there. Moses come down. He sees a golden calf. If they are betrothed, then this idolatry is equivalent to adultery. And the penalty of adultery is death. But if he takes the tablets and he smashes them, there's no document, they're not betrothed, and it's not the same decree. So for the sake of the Jewish people, he smashes the tablets and he raises his voice to yell at them to break the sitra achra, to break the stus, the nonsense of the way that they're thinking. We all have that. We have a way of thinking, and if someone yells at us that we respect, yells at us, that facade of our perspective dissipates immediately. It happens time and time again. I love the picture in my mind is the kid who's doing something wrong and then gets a potch and then comes running to mommy who potched him. I just punished you and now you're coming for a hug? I think we may have just lost Jeff. He'll log back in. So that the idea that Moses is doing this for the sake of the Jewish people, that's why he's doing this, it takes the whole story and it flips it on to an opposite perspective. Moses is not angry. He has not lost control. He is not acting out of his emotions. It's not doing something he was going to regret. No, in fact, later, God himself tested Moses, strength to you for breaking the tablets, right? God himself agrees, you did good, man. You did the right thing here. And validating the importance of the people over the law itself. An amazing statement. And so, and again, the Rebbe is using this as an example of positivity bias. Look for the good, see the good, find the good, chase it down, no matter how brilliant or broken a person individual is, there is wonderful good inside them, and that the people themselves, the Jewish soul, no matter how brilliant or broken, is not a means to an end, but in fact, the Jewish soul is an end unto itself. Hey, talk about teshuvah, coming back. Nice to see you, Jeff.
Yeah. That's what happens when your computer's not plugged in.
Yeah, I'm about to keep checking the juice on mine. It's kind of running low here as well.
All of a sudden, as you're getting to the highlight of the chapter, go on.
But you didn't miss the icing on the cake, because now Zev is going to give us a summary of the chapter and his thoughts on the whole summary. So you came for just in time for the icing on the cake.
Oh, he is, huh? Okay. Now
That'll
I
be
know
tough- that'll be
you
tough
you really
since,
are thinking positive.
It'll be tough since I have to admit I didn't read the chapter.
What do you take away from the session? What did you hear?
Well, there's a good side to everybody. It's a good side to everything.
Yeah.
And even the Talmud talks about the great sages, if they lost their temper, if they became angry at their students, that they would lose their teaching. They said the same about prophets. The prophets would lose their prophecy if they became angry. Like Devorah was given as an example there. So it's amazing here that this gets turned around, because obviously Moshe did not lose his prophecy here, so that there was a different purpose, different motive.
Absolutely. And to be able to, not only in current, but to be able to go back through history and limud schus, find the good to say about people that have been seen in a negative light for 2,000 years or more. It's just absolutely brilliant, but it also shows the depth of the commitment to that positivity bias. We're going to find the silver lining. We're going to see the good one way or another. And the Rebbe has been training Hasidim, for decades. This is how you look at people. This is the way you see people at all times. So on that note, we'll close off our session for the evening. Thank you for joining us.